Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we're reading about the early days, Prabhupada Leela. If you remember, Prabhupada has returned from having spent 5 months in India. So he arrived in San Francisco December the 14th, 1967. And then Prabhupada went to Los Angeles and was trying to encourage the devotees to establish the center in Los Angeles. It was only 4 days, so this is Prabhupada in Los Angeles. It was only 4 days after Prabhupada's arrival. He had just arisen from an afternoon's rest, walked into the front room, and there was Subal. Prabhupada was surprised. Subal was supposed to be in Santa Fe. Subal burst out, "My wife has left me," and a sad tale followed. Subal told how he had left his wife, Krishna Devi Dasi, alone at the Santa Fe temple for a few days and gone to New York to visit his parents. Meanwhile, Krishna Devi had run away with a boy who had been visiting the temple, and she decided to stay with him and give up her husband. "Don't worry," Prabhupada told Subal, "everything will be all right. I will write a letter to Krishna Devi and tell her to come back to you. You go back to Santa Fe tomorrow and everything will be all right." Subal left the next morning for Santa Fe, and Prabhupada, although calm in Prabhupada's presence, began to show deep disturbance over this sordid affair. Krishna Devi was his disciple, and he had performed the sacred marriage ceremony for her and Subal. He had asked them to be an ideal couple, cooperating together in Krishna consciousness. Together they had gone to start a center in New Mexico. "Don't be discouraged," Prabhupada told them. "Even though no one may come to hear you, still you chant and hear." But now Krishna Devi had simply left the temple and her husband. When Subal arrived in Santa Fe, he found that Krishna Devi and her boyfriend, Randy, had left town. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Prabhupada received a letter from Krishna Devi. She said she wanted to stay in Krishna consciousness, but with her new boyfriend. Prabhupada said, "This is all nonsense." And then Prabhupada said, "I will simply go back to Vrindavan and sit and chant Hare Krishna. Why should I do this? Why should I deal with a quarrel between a husband and wife? This is not the business of a sannyasi." Interesting. Prabhupada is now saying he's going to go back to Vrindavan. He didn't come here to deal with some domestic problem between husband and wife. He's a sannyasi. Prabhupada wrote a letter to Krishna Devi in care of the Santa Fe temple, saying, "Your recent activities have been very upsetting to each and every member of our society. I never expected that you should act in this way. If you love me at all, and Krishna, you should immediately return back, either to me or to your husband without delay. In your letter it is understood that you are repenting. You have done a great mistake. Come back and everything will be all right." And then to Subal, Prabhupada wrote the following: "I'm very sorry to learn about your present plight. You must be feeling a great shock for the separation, but there is a great lesson also. Anyway, if you are feeling too heavy-hearted, you may come here and live with me for some time. I hope I shall be able to ease your heaviness." But before Prabhupada's letter even arrived, Subal had already left Santa Fe for Los Angeles, thinking, "I cannot take this anymore. I'm going back to Swamiji." sitting on his porch, taking his noontime massage. Prabhupada suddenly saw Subal looking more miserable than ever, coming up the sidewalk. Prabhupada called out, "Subal!" as Prabhupada was remaining seated. Subal approached and offered obeisances before Prabhupada, who sat in the California sunshine, dressed only in an Indian gamsha, while Gaurasunda massaged him with mustard oil. "Did you get my letter?" Prabhupada asked. "No," Subal replied. "Yes," Prabhupada nodded. "You got my letter. I have written you and told you that if you are feeling too heavy-hearted, you may come here and live with me for some time." Subal is speaking. "So I moved into the crowded front room of Swamiji's apartment. I slept in the living room, right outside of Swamiji's room, and there was only a curtain separating us. At night I could hear him dictating Srimad Bhagavatam. He asked me to carve some Radha Krishna deities for him. I had already carved some Jagannath deities, and now Swamiji said he wanted Radha Krishna deities carved. So I bought a block of mahogany and began carving Radha and Krishna." So it's interesting to hear how Srila Prabhupada, on what level he is dealing with his disciples. Having come from Vrindavan, having spent some 10 or 11 years, from 54 to 65, deeply immersed in the process of bhajan, deeply immersed in the process of hearing and chanting, constantly associating with the previous acharyas through reading the commentaries, writing, engaging in different devotional austerities. He comes here to the West to start a movement. And this also involves dealing with extremely mundane problems. First of all, we read when he first arrived in December, Jivananda, who was serving him, he asked Jivananda any questions. So instead of Jivananda asking about the position of the living entity, about Vrindavan, about the modes of material nature, about some more esoteric or philosophical question, Jivananda says, "I want to get married." This is the level of the consciousness in the people that Prabhupada is dealing with. I want to get married. And here also, this young girl he initiates, then he marries these two, Krishna Devi and Subal, but then Krishna Devi just runs away. So now Prabhupada is writing to her, telling her to come back. I'm going ahead a little because I've read this so many times. So Prabhupada actually, he writes again to Krishna Devi, "Your husband, Subal, is living with me very peacefully. He's carving Radha and Krishna from hardwood. So this life of material existence is just like hardwood. And if we can carve Krishna out of it, that is the success of our life. So at any circumstance, you must not forget Krishna. I love you at my heart, and therefore I gave you the name Krishna Devi Dasi. Don't forget Krishna even for a single moment. Chant Hare Krishna loudly or slowly as it may be convenient. Don't forget to chant the holy name. I hope everything will be all right as soon as you come here with Randy, and I await your arrival with great interest." In other words, Krishna Devi didn't come. She didn't respond to Prabhupada's letter. So Prabhupada wrote a second letter encouraging this lady disciple who's actually completely in Maya. Completely in Maya. She's a complete nonsense. What is he saying? I love you in my heart. Therefore I gave you this name. Please continue chanting. I hope everything will be all right. Come here with your boyfriend. So she did. And Prabhupada actually initiated her boyfriend. So this is the level on which Prabhupada is willing to extend himself in order to preach. In other words, the desire to preach is so strong in Srila Prabhupada's mind, consciousness, that he's willing to do almost anything, literally almost anything, in order to preach. before Srila Prabhupada came to the West, he didn't think that they would have enough. He didn't think he'd be able to eat, the right food. He was actually willing to even just live on, potatoes, just to come to preach. This is an indication of Prabhupada's desire to preach. Why he wanted to preach? He felt compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. It was an instruction he was given by his spiritual master. He was also inspired by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But it's very interesting to see how much Prabhupada is willing to accommodate, the extent to which he's willing to accommodate some persons who are actually in Maya. Of course, later on, after some time, Prabhupada didn't he didn't respond to disciples who had fallen in the same way like this, writing a letter saying, "I love you. This is what this girl needed to hear." And of course it's also true. Prabhupada has great affection and love for all living entities, especially those who were trying to serve him. But, after some years, Prabhupada didn't respond in such a way as this. Prabhupada realized that, people will come and people will go. He also became a little disturbed, much more visibly disturbed in the way his disciples were attempting to practice Grihastha life. He saw that they weren't so serious. But not only in retrospect can we see were devotees in Grihastha life not serious, but sannyasis are also not serious. Brahmacharis are also not serious. Prabhupada received word from Ray Ram in New York that his editing on the Bhagavad Gita manuscript was nearing completion. When Prabhupada read Ray Ram's letter, he exploded. Near completion. I heard this before I started for India. Ray Ram's slow editing was delaying the manuscript too much. Although the contract with Macmillan Company had already been signed, the manuscript has still not been submitted. Seeing Ray Ram's editing as a perpetual delay, Prabhupada decided Ray Ram should immediately stop all other duties and come to Los Angeles. After a few days, Ray Ram arrived. He too settled into the crowded front room of Swamiji's tiny apartment, picking a corner for himself where he could work on the Bhagavad Gita manuscript. After having spoken in the temple in Swamiji's presence one night, Ray Ram wrote home to the devotees in New York the following: "Although Prabhupada's health is delicate, he is not to be held back. After all the activity last night, he continued talking to us when we returned, and then he got up at 2:30 a.m. this morning and worked for 3 hours. He just returned now from a 2.5-mile walk, so he's not exactly weak or failing. And if we say anything to check him, he tells us that this life has no value if it is not used for Krishna. Last week, Garga Muni was telling Prabhupada that he sometimes dreams of how to sell things. And Swamiji said that he also dreams of preaching. But he told us last night that when he's speaking of Krishna, there is no pain." One day on a walk, Prabhupada discovered a special place across the street from his apartment. There on a neighbor's front lawn stood a broad, tall tree. Taking a few disciples with him, Prabhupada went over and sat down beneath the tree. On a warm Los Angeles afternoon, this was a great but simple luxury, sitting in the pleasant sunny atmosphere beneath the shade tree. Ray Ram considered the occasion something to write to the devotees in New York about, and he wrote as follows: "This afternoon I took a stroll to the temple, which is some distance away, and then I returned. And when I returned, I found Swamiji crossing the street from his house, accompanied by Gaurasundar. So I followed them. Swamiji took his seat under a big oak tree, which grows close to our house across the street. Prabhupada said, 'Meditation under a tree is very nice.'" Prabhupada said, As we sat there, other devotees came and joined us, all sitting around Swamiji on some unknown person's lawn under their tree. Prabhupada said, therefore in former times sages used to sit underneath trees and teach. I know that I'm a worthless fool. Here I sit at Swamiji's feet, and my tears aren't flowing or my heart breaking with joy. But even for a fool, Swamiji's presence is intoxicating in the extreme. Swamiji said that saintly persons in India often sat under trees and lived there with no other shelter. The 6 Goswamis who wrote books under the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu lived this way in Vrindavan, staying each night under a different tree and compiling sublime Sanskrit literatures. Of course, they were staying under Kalpavriksha trees. So Kalpavriksha tree is a desire tree. So these desire trees fulfilled all the desires of the Goswamis, so they would not be unnecessarily inconvenienced. Hearing Swamiji speak on such transcendental subjects in this setting fit perfectly the devotee's ideal notion of the Guru beneath an ancient towering banyan tree in India. It didn't seem to them that they were sitting in an ordinary neighborhood in Los Angeles. Often Aniruddha would return to the apartment after shopping or errands, and he would see from afar, quote, this gorgeous-looking, saffron-robed person sitting there on the grassy lawn. One day, as Subal, Govinda Dasi, Ray Ram, and others sat with Prabhupada in the shade, Prabhupada observed a pair of white butterflies. Just see these worms, he said, pointing to the butterflies. Here also there is husband and wife. The whole world is in this bondage. Knowing that Subal was still lamenting, Prabhupada continued to speak about the topics on both their minds. Prabhupada said, it is not they are able to stay and serve Krishna. Maya is so strong, it is Krishna's divine energy, and for someone to actually stay engaged in Krishna's service is very rare. The living entity is practically helpless under the sway of Maya's power and can only cry out to Krishna for help. But we have to pray at every moment that the power of Maya does not disturb us. So this is a very nice perspective, how we should see things. Krishna Devi is left, so Prabhupada is pointing out, don't be surprised that people leave, but rather be surprised that people stay. It is wonderful that we're able to stay. Maya is so strong, it is Krishna's divine energy. For someone to stay engaged in Krishna's service is very rare. This is how we should see it. Rather than become despondent or despair if after preaching and someone coming to the temple, someone leaves. No, but rather look at it from the point of view, it's amazing that devotees are able to continue serving Krishna. Everyone has come to this material world. Why have we come here? Because we're rebellious. So, the living entities in this material world are rebellious. So, it's highly unlikely to find someone who's not rebellious. But in order to become a devotee, one actually has to again agree to follow Krishna's will. Prabhupada concludes, we have to pray at every moment that the power of Maya does not disturb us. So this is something we can pray for. So in the morning, which is very auspicious time, Mangalati, you should pray that Maya doesn't bewilder you. You should pray to the spiritual master, to the previous acharyas, to Lord Nrsingadev, to the Panchatattva, to the members of Panchatattva, that Maya does not bewilder you. How many of us actually pray like that on a regular basis in Mangalati? Do many of us pray like that, Petit Bhavan? We should. Instead of looking around at each other, figuring out who's playing the cartels, who's not, who's sitting on the floor today and who's not. so many other things, we should actually try to pray with feeling to be protected from the influence of Maya. And on a positive side, to be engaged in the service of the spiritual master, to be engaged in Prabhupada's mission, to do something for Srila Prabhupada, to understand Srila Prabhupada's position, to understand more my relationship with my spiritual master, my Srila Prabhupada, to understand Srila Prabhupada's position in the spiritual world. I mean, these are things worthy of praying for. And according to the adhikari of the devotee, then you'll pray for higher things. At a beginning stage, you're just praying to control your mind, to control lusty thoughts. But as time passes, you're going to start praying for more positive things. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any questions, comments? So from this example of how Prabhupada was so accommodating and disturbed about Subal and about Krishna Devi who left him, I think we can also learn to become a bit more sensitive to others. Of course, still, it's not that, the brahmacharis start becoming too sensitive about the ladies and vice versa. There's still some segregation that has to be there. But in general, there should be some sensitivity towards each other and appreciation towards each other. Appreciation for what, other devotees are doing, even though it may not be done properly, but at least we should try to look at the mood in which it's done. And when Krishna sends people to this temple, he sends them guests, we should try to respond and be a little sensitive to these people's needs and mentalities. Krishna sent these new devotees, this Jonathan and Daniel. We should be a little sensitive to their dispositions, to where they're coming from, and the modes of material nature, and sort of try to help them accordingly, be their friends, etc. Just as Prabhupada is doing. The difference between, Prabhupada's level and, and Subal's level is far greater than the difference between our level of consciousness and the people we're dealing with. But Prabhupada came down from that lofty level, and is relating, in a somewhat almost mundane way. He's telling this girl, Krishna Devi, all right, I love you, come back. Or if you want to get married to this other person, all right. And actually he authorizes it and ends up initiating this other person. This is simply to encourage. It's all it is, just to encourage. And Prabhupada is explaining the real truth. He's saying, what am I doing? I'm a sannyasi. I should go back to Vrindavan. What am I doing dealing with this? Domestic affairs. It's not the business of a sannyasi. It's true. But in order to encourage, Prabhupada is willing to do this. Of course, as I explained, the other part of the realization is that Prabhupada did not continue to deal on this level. His role did change, but it had to change, and he became the founder acharya. He became more in the background and didn't deal, in a personal way with all of his disciples. He felt that his main contribution was simply to deal with certain leaders and to translate the Bhagavatam. He felt that this was more important. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi.